Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Harrison Ford, Ellen announced with theatrical enthusiasm. The crowd erupted as Ford walked out, his weathered face showing the slightest hint of reluctance. He waved politely but kept his distance as he settled into the guest chair, his posture already defensive. "Harrison, Harrison, Harrison," Ellen began, leaning forward with predatory interest. "You look fantastic for someone who's been flying planes and crashing them for decades. Tell us about that little incident last year. You know, the one where you nearly took out a commercial airliner?" Ford's jaw tightened perceptibly. The 2017 incident at John Wayne Airport, where he'd mistakenly landed on a taxiway rather than the runway, had been a source of embarrassment and intense media scrutiny. "That was thoroughly investigated by the FAA," Ford replied tersely. "Mistakes happen in aviation. I've been flying for 40 years. Ellen's grin widened, sensing vulnerability. "But Harrison, our viewers want to know, were you impaired? I mean, at your age, maybe it's time to hang up those pilot wings? We've all seen the footage of you stumbling around Hollywood lately." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Ford's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "I wasn't impaired, and I don't stumble. That's an irresponsible thing to suggest on national television." "Oh, come on, we're all friends here," Ellen pressed, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "You've had what? 3 plane crashes? 4 helicopter incidents? At some point, doesn't basic math suggest you're a danger to yourself and others? I mean, we love you, but should someone your age really be operating heavy machinery?" Ford's eyes flashed dangerously. "My age? What exactly are you implying?" The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras. Ellen had crossed a line, but he seemed oblivious, caught up in what he clearly thought was entertaining television. "Well, let's be honest. You're 81 years old. Your reflexes aren't what they used to be. Remember when you broke your leg on the Millennium Falcon set? Maybe it's time to accept that your action hero days are behind you." "You think this is funny?" Ford's voice dropped to a menacing whisper that somehow carried throughout the studio. "You invite me here under the pretense of promoting my work, then ambush me with ageist garbage and false allegations about my flying?" Ellen seemed to realize. He'd miscalculated, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Hey, I'm just asking the questions America wants answered. Your fans deserve to know if their hero is still capable of—" "Stop." Ford's single word cut through Ellen's rambling like a blade. The actor stood slowly, his full height imposing despite his years. "This interview is over." But Ellen wasn't finished. As Ford moved toward the edge of the set, the host made one final catastrophic decision that would define both their legacies. "Forever! Running away, Harrison?" Ellen called out, his voice amplified by his lapel microphone. "Just like you ran from that plane crash investigation? Just like you ran from your responsibility as a pilot?" Ford froze mid-step. The audience gasped audibly. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath, unsure whether to keep rolling. The veteran actor turned slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury that had intimidated movie villains for decades. "What did you just say?" Ford's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of barely contained rage. Ellen, drunk on what he perceived as ratings gold, doubled down. "You heard me. Every time things get tough, Harrison Ford runs. From marriages, from responsibilities, from accountability. America's supposed hero is just a coward in a leather jacket." The studio erupted. Audience members began shouting, some defending Ford, others seemingly energized by the chaos. Security guards shifted nervously near the exits, unsure whether to intervene. Ford's publicist, watching from the wings, was frantically gesturing for the cameras to stop rolling, but Ellen's production team ignored her completely. Ford walked back toward Ellen's desk with deliberate, measured steps. Each footfall echoed in the suddenly hushed studio. When he reached the host's chair, he leaned down, placing both hands on the desk, his face inches from Ellen's. "You want to talk about running?" Ford's voice was steady, controlled, terrifying. In its calm, let's talk about how you've been running from the truth about your own behavior for years. Let's talk about the staff members who've quit because of your toxic treatment. Let's talk about the NDAs and the payoffs. Ellen's confident smirk faltered for the first time. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't, Ford straightened, addressing the cameras directly now. You never do you, Ellen? When your own employees speak up about the hostile work environment you've created, when former guests share stories about your off-camera behavior, you just laugh it off. Claim it's all misunderstandings. The color drained from Ellen's face. This wasn't part of his script. This wasn't the controllable controversy he'd orchestrated. Ford was turning the tables, and the cameras were still rolling. Harrison, I think you're confused, Ellen stammered, trying to regain control. I'm not confused, Ford cut him off. I'm clear-headed for the first time since I walked onto this set. You invited me here to humiliate me, to make yourself look clever at my expense. But you picked the wrong target. Ellen's producers were gesturing frantically from behind the cameras, unsure whether to cut the feed or let the disaster continue. The live audience was completely silent now, watching two Hollywood titans engage in a battle that would reshape both their careers. You think age makes me weak? Ford continued, his voice rising slightly. You think because I've made mistakes, because I've had accidents, that gives you the right to mock me on national television? To question my competence, my character? I was just, Ellen began. You were just being yourself, Ford interrupted. And that's exactly the problem. This is who you really are when the cameras are rolling. This is the real Ellen, cruel, petty, using your platform to tear people down instead of building them up. Ellen shot to his feet, his own anger finally breaking through his practiced television persona. How dare you lecture me about character? You're the one with multiple divorces, multiple crashes, multiple what? Ford stepped closer, his voice dangerous. Multiple what, Ellen? The tension in the studio was suffocating. Security guards moved closer to the set, ready to intervene if the confrontation turned physical. Ellen realized he'd pushed too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down now. Multiple failures, Ellen spat, his voice cracking slightly. Multiple times you've endangered innocent people with your reckless behavior. At least I'm honest about who I am. Ford's laugh was cold, mirthless. Honest? You? The man who built his career on a fake persona of kindness while treating his staff like garbage behind closed doors? You want to talk about endangering people? What about the psychological damage you've inflicted on your own employees? The audience was transfixed, some holding up phones despite security's earlier warnings. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a public execution, and everyone could sense it. Ellen's hands were shaking now, his carefully constructed facade crumbling on live television. You don't know anything about my show, about my people. I know enough, Ford interrupted, his voice gaining strength. I know about the writers who were fired for not laughing at your jokes during rehearsal. I know about the assistants who were screamed at for bringing you the wrong coffee. I know about the culture of fear you've created while pretending to spread joy and positivity. The studio lights seemed to grow hotter, casting harsh shadows across both men's faces. Ellen's makeup was beginning to run slightly under the pressure, while Ford appeared more commanding with each passing moment. That's all gossip and rumors, Ellen stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Disgruntled former employees making up stories. Stories? Ford's voice rose to a roar that silenced the entire studio. 37 complaints filed, with HR in the past 2 years. 17 NDAs signed by former staff members. A turnover rate of 70% in your production team. Those aren't stories, Ellen. Those are facts. Ellen's face went ashen. The specific numbers hit like physical blows, and everyone in the studio could see him deflating in real time. His publicist was making frantic cutting motions from the wings, But the cameras kept rolling. How do you... Where did you get... Ellen's voice was barely audible now. I have friends in this industry, Ford said, his tone becoming almost conversational, which somehow made it more menacing. Real friends, people who actually care about the welfare of workers in Hollywood. They've been watching you for years, documenting your behavior, waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. The audience was completely silent now, afraid to even breathe. This had gone far beyond a celebrity feud. This was character assassination, happening in real time, and Ford was wielding the blade with surgical precision. Ellen tried desperately to regain control. This is my show, Harrison. These are serious accusations you're making without any proof. Proof? Ford reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. You mean like this email you sent to your head writer last month? The one where you called her worthless and threatened to ruin her career if she didn't rewrite your monologue? Ellen's eyes widened in horror. You can't. That's private correspondence. Private correspondence that shows your true character. Ford unfolded the paper slowly, deliberately. Should I read it aloud? Let America hear what their beloved talk show host really thinks of the people who make his show possible? Ellen lunged forward, trying to grab the paper, but Ford easily stepped back. The sudden movement caused security. Guards to tense, hands moving toward their radios. The studio erupted in gasps and murmurs as Ellen's desperation became physically manifest. Give me that, Ellen demanded, his voice shrill and unrecognizable from his usual smooth television persona. Why? Ford held the paper just out of reach. Afraid of what it says about you? Afraid that America will finally see who you really are when the cameras stop rolling and the audience goes home? Ellen's breathing was labored now, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He looked around the studio wildly, seeking an escape route, but found himself trapped by cameras, audience, and his own crumbling reputation. This isn't over, Ellen whispered, but his words carried no threat, only defeat. Ford folded the paper, carefully, and returned it to his pocket, his movements deliberate and calm. Actually, Ellen, it is over. It's been over for a long time. You just didn't realize it yet. The studio remained frozen in stunned silence as Ford turned to address the cameras directly, ignoring Ellen completely now. To everyone watching at home, to the staff working on this show, to anyone who's ever been mistreated by someone in a position of power, you don't have to accept abuse disguised as entertainment. Ellen slumped back into his chair. The fight completely drained out of him. His hands trembled as he reached for his water glass, but even that simple action seemed to require enormous effort. The confident host who had started the show was gone, replaced by a broken man facing the consequences of years of toxic behavior. The entertainment industry has protected people like this for too long, Ford continued, his voice steady and authoritative. We've all looked the other way, made excuses, enabled the abuse because it was easier than confronting the truth. But silence isn't kindness. Silence is complicity. From the wings, Ellen's executive producer was frantically signaling to cut, to commercial, but the camera operators seemed mesmerized by what was unfolding. This was television history in the making, and everyone knew it. Ellen made one last desperate attempt to salvage his dignity. Harrison, please, this has gone too far. Can't we just what? Ford turned back to face him, and for a moment, there was almost pity in his eyes. Pretend this didn't happen? Go back to the fake smiles and hollow laughter? Let you continue destroying people's lives while America cheers? Ellen's voice broke completely. I never meant to hurt anyone. I was just trying to make good television. Good television doesn't require crushing people's spirits, Ford replied firmly. Good entertainment doesn't come at the expense of human dignity. You confused cruelty with comedy, Ellen, and that's cost you everything. The audience began to murmur among themselves, the spell of silence finally breaking. Some were recording. On their phones, others were simply staring in disbelief at the total destruction of a television empire happening before their eyes. Ford straightened his jacket and looked around the studio one final time. "I came here tonight to promote my work, to connect with fans, to have a conversation. Instead, I've witnessed something much more important. The end of an era where bullies could hide behind bright lights and applause." He walked toward the edge of the set with purposeful strides, but paused at the boundary between the stage and the real world. Without turning around, he delivered his final words to Ellen and to America. To the crew members who've suffered in silence, to the writers who've been humiliated, to the assistants who've been screamed at, you deserve better. Your stories matter. Your dignity matters. And maybe now, finally, people will listen. Ford stepped off the set and disappeared into the wings, leaving Ellen alone under the harsh studio lights. The host sat motionless for nearly 30 seconds, the weight of his destroyed career settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Finally, Ellen looked directly into the main camera, his eyes red and hollow. We'll be right back after these messages," he whispered, but his voice was so broken that the words were barely audible. The floor manager finally had the presence of mind to call for commercial break. As the cameras stopped rolling and the studio lights dimmed, Ellen remained in his chair, staring at nothing, while his staff avoided eye contact and whispered among themselves. By the next morning, clips of the confrontation had garnered over 50 million views across social media platforms. Ellen's show was canceled within a week, his endorsement deals evaporated, and his reputation lay in ruins. Meanwhile, Harrison Ford became an unlikely champion for workplace dignity, his courage to speak truth to power, inspiring a new wave of accountability in Hollywood. The entertainment industry would never be quite the same, and it all started with one man's refusal to tolerate cruelty disguised as entertainment.